Hi, this is Brian with Prophetless Medium Post. Today we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to do a behind the scenes of the short that we released last week. It's probably going to be kind of a longer one, and I'll make sure I break it up into different chapters so you can skip around if there's something you're not interested in. If you haven't seen the short yet, I'll put a link up above where you can see it. It's only a minute long, so it's pretty short. With that said, let's take a look at the storyboard. Okay, so here's our storyboard. We threw this together pretty quickly. Nothing too crazy. It's a very, very simple idea where a person has writer's block and they're really frustrated. They take off their hat as they're sitting at their desk to reveal a small person sitting at a desk with the lights flickering. To fix this, the main character goes on his computer, searches for a light bulb. He finds the light bulb he needs, and then he reaches inside and grabs it right off the screen and then hands it to the small person inside his head. The person inside his head changes the light bulb, and then voila, he's got light. Now he's able to write again and fade out. So pretty easy concept, nothing too crazy. There was some technical things that we had to be aware of before we started shooting. Let's go over the main ones. The first thing was definitely 3D tracking. We knew that we needed a really accurate track of the head. So we decided that what we should do is get a scan of the head. Now at the time I didn't have one of the newer iPhones or iPads that did LiDAR scanning. So we did it old school for photogrammetry, and I'll show you how we did that. The other thing we had to be aware of was the flickering. And this one ended up being a pretty easy solution, so it wasn't too bad. We did a lot of it in camera, and we just had to do the lighting inside the 3D model, which was actually pretty easy. The biggest one was this transfer, was taking the light bulb off the screen and then handing it to the small person inside of the main character's head. That was probably the biggest challenge, because we did need to figure out the scale between going from real world to the miniature world, at least to some degree, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to do this transfer unless you did everything CG, which I didn't want to do. So we had to do a little bit of research into what that scale might be. So let's take a look at how we shot some of this stuff, try to solve these problems. So inside Resolve, let's see. Let's just take a look at the first thing was, let's talk about the flickering light, because that was done on set. So you can see here, this is one of the shots. We shot John. This is my friend John, who was inside the head. And this is my friend Rich, who was the main character. You can see here, all we did was we had an old light, which has a switch that stays on. And we plugged that into this light strip. And right here is the breaker. And you can flick it on and off to make the light flicker. And so that's how we did that. We just did a bunch of takes from the side angle and from the front angle so that we had choices. So the entire sequence we decided to shoot with pretty much two angles when it came to visual effects. We only shot side and front. You know, it wasn't too complicated. We had plenty of choices to figure out what we wanted to use. So that's how we did that, and we'll get into the visual effects part of it later on when we get into Fusion. The next thing I want to talk about is the 3D tracking. Now, so we knew we needed a scan, and since we had the green screen already set up, let's go take a look how we approached this. So all I did was, you can see down here I have these 3 clips. I put the camera up high and then put it down about eye level and then a little bit lower, and just had Rich spin around on an office chair. And then I took these into Fusion, pulled the key, and then was able to take stills and then bring it into a program called Metashape, where I was able to do the photogrammetry and get a really accurate 3D model of Rich's head. Other big thing was the switch, right? When we did this transfer from Rich's hand to John, from the real world to the small world. So first we had to make sure we had the scale right. So what I did was, let's go back here a little bit. Took a picture of Rich with the light box beside him, brought that still into Fusion, and then I just rotoed the light bulb and then shrank it down a certain percentage to about what I thought John's size would be inside his head. Once I did that, once I figured out that percentage, what I did, I took a bunch of pictures of the light bulb box from every single angle and brought that into Infinity Photo and just made kind of a cube map that I could use and scaled it down that percentage and printed it out. I did end up having to print it out a couple times to try to get the scale correct, but I ended up with a decent size scale, or at least close enough that I could work with it. And we cut this out. I found a piece of styrofoam from some packaging and then used a glue stick to stick this thing on it. So we had a miniature version of the light bulb box. So we have this miniature version and we have the real world version. So the way we shot that was John from the left, from the side, and we handed him the box. So we have him this way. And then we also did it from the front view. So we, depending on which angle looked the best. And then we did the same thing with Rich. We had Rich drop the box, like hand it over, and we purposefully kept his arm away from, trying to keep it away from his head so that we could cut it and move it into position to line up with John. And so we did that from the front, and we also did it from the side. We ended up with using the side. It looked the best. And I'll show you how we put this all together a little bit later. Okay, so now we have shot everything, brought in our footage, and we edited it. And once we've done the edit, I just want to show you the kind of workflow we were using. I wanted to use Fusion standalone for this. So on each one of these VFX clips, you can see it says VFX Connect. So each one of these clips, what I did was new VFX Connect clip. And when you do that, you get to actually render out a file for this separate. And I just this is the workflow I used. So I just wanted to point that out. So if you're wondering why I'm not just using the Fusion tab, although I easily could have done it that way too. Let's look at the first thing that we need to do. Once we got all our VFX clips, we've rendered them out. Now we're ready to start the process of doing the visual effects. And the first thing we need to do, which is the basis of most of it, is get this scan for Rich's head ready for 3D tracking and the modeling. So let me show you how we did that. Okay, so here's an example of one of the 3 takes that we took right here, where we have Rich going around the camera. And the way that we did this, I just went over into Fusion, added a delta keyer, did a quick key, didn't have to be too crazy, so that I have an alpha matte. And what I did was each one of these, and it was a little bit time consuming, but you know what, it worked out fine. Instead of taking a whole bunch of stills, I used the camera we were shooting with, which was 4K, just had him turn around, and on the frames that I wanted, say like this frame, I would go right click, save image, and I saved these images as PNG files. Although I suppose you could use it, save them as a TIFF or something like that. Anything that saves an alpha, because I want to have that alpha channel inside the program Metashape. It's really helpful when you're trying to do 3D scans of things to be able to key out everything but the main thing you're trying to make a model of. So anyway, that's what I did. I just basically went through here and I saved that. I want to save that image. You know, go to another angle. Okay, right click, save this image. And just go along and just save images with this alpha, since I've already pre-keyed it. And once I did that, I brought them into Metashape. So let's head over into Metashape. Okay, so now we're in Metashape. This is my finished scan. You can see right here. And that's a pretty decent model of Rich's head. What I did was I was able to bring in, I did 60 frames. You can see here, these are all the frames. And if I click on this button here, it shows you the masks. So that means that when Metashape does the scanning, it's only going to use what's in the white. And that's why you get such a nice clean image. All I did was bring those images in, and there's a workflow button here, align photos, build the mesh, build point cloud, and then build texture, and was able to go through that and then got this great model. Once I was done with my model, I was happy with it. It looks good. I exported out a OBJ and brought that into Houdini to kind of clean it up and get it ready for 3D tracking. So let's head over into Houdini. Okay, so here we are in Houdini. You don't really need to use Houdini. You could use Cinema 4D or Blender, any number of programs that can alter a 3D object. It's not, Houdini is just what I have. So I need to clean this up, and I also want to center the model and get it to a nice starting point. And that's what all of this is. This is a node-based. If you don't know Houdini, this is node-based. This is just cutting away, and this is what I ended up with. If we look there, so I cut away all the bottom and centered the object at 0, 0. That is going to be the starting point right now. So from here on out, this is kind of like the cutoff point. From here on out, this is our model that we're using, because everything's going to be based off of this axis. From Houdini, I saved out this OBJ to do my 3D tracking off of this model and my head geometry for inside the head. Let's go over and take a look at how we did the model real quick. I'm just going to do an overview of that. So I used 3D Coat for this model, although you could use Blender or any other program. It doesn't really matter. I just ended up, I guess I got caught by an advertisement. They were having a sale on 3D Coat, so I bought it. It's a great piece of software. I mean, literally watched a couple of videos and I was able to make this little thing. And the way I did it was I brought in the head. So this is the scanned head from Houdini. So it's zeroed out in the same spot. Now that's really important that it's this model, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to use this head to do the 3D tracking, and we want this model to swap out with the head so that everything lines up perfect. So that's why it's important to make sure that you zero out and get your 3D models centered. So I did that, and then I basically turned this into, I don't know what they call it in 3D Coat, but a live object, so that you can build your model and it'll stick to the head. And by doing that, I was able to do all the, we just added all these different pieces. Whoops, not that. And you can see it sticks right to the model. And that way you can get these nice deep details. So if so you can see, like, if we come closer in, you get these nice details that will fit right onto the head once we've done the 3D track, if it's accurate. So anyway, I don't really want to do a tutorial on 3D Coat because I don't really know it that well. But that's basically how I did it. So you could do it in Blender, whatever you want. And then I was able to export this out. And that's what we're going to use. And I'll show you how that all works later on in the pipeline. So we have our scanned model and we have our 3D model, and now we're ready to start working on the visual effects. So, and the first step would be doing the 3D tracking, and I did this in PFTrack. So here we are in PFTrack. I'm just going to do a quick overview. I'm not really going to do a lesson on this. But basically, I brought in the geometry. I didn't even solve for the camera. I just did the straight geometry track. And what that will do is just give you a 3D camera in 3D space and then the model. So, because it wasn't that important for what we're doing here. So I brought in my model that I squared up from Houdini so that my axis is at 0, 0, 0. And then using the geometry track, I went through and tracked through. And I did that with each one of the visual effects shots that we were replacing the head. And you can see that it wasn't perfect, so I had to do some keyframes here. You can see the keyframes. But once I was done with that and got everything looking good and all the shots, then I exported and I used Alembic format. I think you could easily use the FBX format also, and it probably would work just as well. I've been having less problems with Alembic just recently, but that changes. So once we were done with all of this 3D tracking for each one of the shots, then we went back into Houdini to start doing the renders of the headband and the inside of the head. So let's go back into Houdini. Okay, so we're back in Houdini, and let me just go over. So what we did for each one of these shots is we brought in our Alembic file. So we just hit import Alembic, and now again, this could be done in any other 3D software. It doesn't have to be Houdini. Blender would do this just as well, or Cinema 4D or Maya or whatever. So I brought in my Alembic file, and if I click that open, you can see I have my camera. It's just a static camera. And then over here, where it says unnamed geometry, that is our animation. So if I go through here, you can see that the head sticks right to the head. So anything inside here is going to have that animation. So the way it came in was like this. Let me turn off that. So this is the way it came in, straight from PFTrack. I turned that model off, and then I brought in our geometry from 3D Coat, which you can see here. Now that has all the animation on it. So you can see now we got that animation, the head animation. And because the axis is in the exact same spot, it will transfer exactly over and it'll line up just perfect. Over here, I made this little geometry in Houdini, and I just cut off the head so that I can use this as a matte. And so this geometry here, I used a shadow matte material. And that basically all that's going to do is catch the shadows, and it's also going to matte out any of this stuff. Anyway, this is the basic setup. And for the lighting, I used an environment light. So I just found an HDR map that looked pretty good. And let me just turn this off so you can see. So this is the HDR map. You can see it's obviously not the right place, but it had the kind of lighting. I tried a couple different HDR maps to get the lighting kind of the way I wanted it. I'll just show you what the render looks like from Houdini. So let's go into the render, and let me kick off our render real quick. Okay, well, this is still rendering. It's going to take a few minutes. The main part I wanted to point out was that as I was rendering, you can see here, if I change it to alpha, you can see all the shadow. So we wanted this contact shadow, but we don't want all this other stuff. Now I could have done some things to probably fix this inside of Houdini, but it's really going to be just as quick for me to make a matte and cut out all this extra junk inside Fusion. So I didn't bother. I just let it render. Yeah, so now I did this. This is the exact same process that I use for every single shot. Use the same HDR map, and basically just ran all the cameras through this and then exported them out as EXRs, and then brought those into Fusion for compositing. So now that we have all our renders done, we're finally get ready to start compositing everything and put it together. Okay, so now here we are in Fusion. And let me just pull out here. And this is the basic comp for all of John inside the head and the 3D model that we rendered out from Houdini. So let me just take a look at what's going on here. So if we come in first, let's take a look at the 3D model that we rendered from Houdini. So this is how it comes in. This was an EXR. And so the color space is off. We had to add a gamut to correct the color space. I added a little depth blur to kind of blur the back. That might be a little too much, but whatever. And then color corrected it to blend it in. The next thing that we needed to take care of is the lighting. So the lighting, as the light was flickering, we had to take care of that. And let me just show you how we did that. So what I wanted to do was I needed the same model that we used to render with. I actually want to use that model inside inside Fusion, so that I could make the lights show up on the walls. And so what I did, let's look at this. This is the same Alembic file that we exported from PFTrack that we used in Houdini. I brought that same file into Fusion. And so this should line up exactly the same, which means we can use this file to add in extra things. So let me just explain that a little bit more. So this is the file that comes in. We have a camera, and then we have our 3D geometry, and this has got the animation of the geometry track. And you can see as I go through all the animations there. And that's going to match perfectly with what we rendered from Houdini. Now, using this information, what we can do is this 3D geometry has all the animation. So we can add other things to this animation. And if it has the same center point, and this is why it was so important to make sure that we had the right center point at the very beginning of the process, then it's going to match exactly, we can place it in the same space. So let me show you how that works. So in this case, we had, I brought in the 3D model, which is in the 0, 0 space, right? I added a spotlight to it. And if we look at the merge, you can see, if we zoom in here, you can see here's the spotlight, right? And if I click on it, you can see there's a whole bunch of keyframes. So this is to match the lighting throughout. Now you can see it better if let's split this, and you can look at the final. But you can see as the light comes on in here, I would keyframe it on in here, and then you can see it come on. And that's the same model, so it's going to match up perfectly. So anyway, so I set this little thing up. This is the geometry track node with all the animation. Once I put that on there, you can see it shot it right to the right location of the geometry track. Here's that camera from the Alembic file, and then merged it over, and then rendered it out, and then I get this light patch. All right. And then I use a channel, because this piece right here did not have an alpha, and I just want that little piece. So what I did was I used a channel boolean, and now this isn't perfect, but it was good enough for what we needed. I just pushed the red channel into the alpha, and that gave me this like little bit of light, and then merged it over the top. So now you can see the light come on and off right in here. And that's perfect. So the next thing we need to do is add John in. So let me go over to John. He's over here in this section. And we have John at the desk. I used a time speed here, and I can use this time speed. In that time speed, you can see I can just shift. So I set the speed, and then I just shifted the delay so that I can match it up to wherever I wanted the lights to be flickering in the scene. Then I used a delta here, just keyed it out, rectangle, just to cut out everything else. And then what I did was I used this keyed thing and put it on a card in 3D space. And this is similar to the light setup that we had up here. I brought in the mesh. So I have it set to matte, and I'll show you why in a second. So I brought in this, and then merged my John on a card in 3D space to fit inside the head. And just like we did with the lights, I added that to this right here, which was the 3D geometry, the geometry track animation. So the same file from the Alembic. Now the reason I had this set to matte is because if we look, let me just turn that back on to matte. And so here's our geometry, so that pushes it in the right space. Then we bring in our camera from our Alembic, just like the light, and then we render it. Now the reason I have this set to matte, if I turn it off, you can see, that's just black. We don't want that. I actually want this to be cut out with the matte. That's this line. So I've already done, basically I've already done the roto shape, because this is the geometry we're putting in. The Alembic file matches perfectly with the Alembic. It's the same file we used to render from Houdini. So we can use our 3D model as a matte. And that's how I used it. So I dropped him in there, and that it's already pre-matted to fit with our scene. And that's why you end up with this, where the desk is cut off already. I just did a quick color correct, a little bit of blur, and then merged that over. So now we have John inside the head. Everything's matted out. Everything looks pretty good. And then we have the main plate. So let me just go here. So here's the main plate. This is their original shot. Did some paint work because we had to get rid of the top of Rich's head. And then we merge that over. I'm going to unplug that for now. And then we merge that over. And this is where that issue I was talking about in Houdini, where we want all of these contact shadows around the edge, but we don't want it over anywhere else. And that's pretty easy to take care of. So let's go back over to, so starting from this point, this is the render from Houdini. If I turn that on, you can see, wow, that's really bright there. And this is all the shadow. I just did an offshoot from the gamut point. And in the matte control, I added a matte control, and I brought the threshold way up to tighten it up. So this is what it was originally, and just brought that up to get rid of like everything. And then brought that down, shot it into a bitmap so that it's a straight alpha, and then used another matte control. And in this one, I just blurred it and expanded it a little bit so that we can use it to cut out. So now if we look at this, I just plug that matte into the matte channel, and voila, cleaned up. We still have our contact shadows around the edges, but it's gotten rid of everything else. And so now if we go through, you can see that everything is lining up nicely. So that's the basics of almost all of the, pretty much all the shots that have to do with John being inside of Rich's head. I want to take a look at two more, which is the taking the box off the screen and the transfer, which those are a little bit different. So let's go over and check out. This is the taking the box off the screen. Okay. So let's see. This is the original. This is the final. So we had some issues. This was great that we could do this, but the box was way too dark. We wanted it to be brighter. And we also want to make it look like that box that he grabs was just like one of these other light bulbs. So we had a few issues we had to deal with. Okay, let's see. One of the first things is to make a patch that would cover up this area here where his hand is coming across and where this box is going to be. Let's see what we did there. I did a time speed to get to a clean frame, and in this time speed, it's just a freeze frame on the first frame. Did a little remove noise just to help clean it up. And then we set up a patch. So I made a polygon around the area that I wanted to block out, and using a black background, I just made a black patch. This section here is another little polygon where I grabbed if you look at the final, you can see we have these numbers here, which is the size of the image, and I just wanted to add that. So we started with this black. So I grabbed this one from somewhere down here on one of them, and I just transformed it up to put the numbers on the bottom of that little black square. And then this one over here, took this light bulb and then transferred it up to make the patch. A little transform, grid warp to kind of put it into place because perspective was a little different. And there we go. Now I have this patch for this area. Then we have this transform. And in this transform, we actually have tracking information. So if I look at this transform, you look at these numbers, you can see, because there was a little bit of a wiggle once he touched the screen, so we needed to do some tracking. So I just did a tracker and added it to the center point. So that's that part. That's the patch that's going to go over where the box is. The next part was the actual box. So we had, if you remember earlier, I talked about, we took pictures of the box. So I had an idea. I made a cube matte out of the box and was able to put that right on a shape 3D. So we have a cube, and the cube is mapped this way. So by setting up this cube, I'm actually able to, I'm actually able to line up that cube map to the box. So I actually have like a 3D box now. So I did that. So we add that cube map to the cube, and you can see the dimensions here. And to just make it look the way we want it, put in a merge. So here I have this merge with all of these lights. And this is just a camera that I put into the scene. And we added these point light and a couple spotlights just to give the shadows and stuff like that. Rendered that out. And now we have this 2D render. Now if I look at this 2D render, you can see it doesn't move, right? And that's what we wanted to do. So the way that I'm using this, and I'll show you in the next shot, is that we use it a little bit more, is I'm taking this 3D so I can light a 3D object, but then I'm just using it as a still. So I rendered it out. Now I have this 2D, basically 2D still, doesn't move. And then I'm working in 2D. So from that point, let's see. The next thing is the shadows. So that's what this is. So I added a matte with a black background to add shadows. So as his fingers come close, the shadows start to show up. So if we look at it through here, you can see the keyframes here. You can see that there. Now you can see the shadow come on. And if we look at the final, you can see there, now the shadows come on. It looks pretty good. After I'm done with getting the shadows on, now remember this is still. Then I added a tracker and we tracked it in. So now we have motion. And all I did was match the original box. And then we merged those together. And now we have this. So now I have the whole motion. And the box doesn't really change. So it grabs it and it pretty much pulls it straight away. So we don't have to worry about any turning. Add a little bit of film grain to help match it in. And then let's see where we are now. So if I look at so we're at this. Then we come to the original. So if we look here, this is where we're going to bring the original back in and merge that. Let me take that off and merge that over the top. Just trying to give you exactly what's going on here. Sorry, it might be a little confusing. So now we're merging our patch over the top of the original image at this point. So we need roto for the hands and stuff like that. And that's what all of this is. So if I plug that in, you can see there's all the roto. So that took a little while because I had to do the roto for this whole area. That's what that is. And then I had to do a little bit more paint work. So this is pretty much done, except I wanted to get rid of the DuckDuckGo stuff. And that's what this is. So I added a paint and a tracker. And that got rid of the DuckDuckGo symbols. And that's pretty much it. So that's basically how we did this one. Pretty straightforward. And the last one we'll take a look at, we want to do is the transfer. So let's just start at we'll start at the top here. So we start with the hand coming up. We added a time speed to line it up with the animation we wanted. Did a little bit of transform, keyed it, then transformed it again to get it into position. And then we have this section here. And all this right here is paint work for when he lets go of the box. So if we take a look at the original image from the time speed, you can see right here when he releases, we want to be able to erase this box. We're going to replace the light box in the hand until it gets into John's hand. Then we're going to switch from a 3D box to the original box once he gets his hands on it. And I'll show you how we're going to do that. So right here, we need to paint out the box for the transfer. And that's what all of this is. So right down here, you can see I have a time speed. So I just have a still frame of 85. And then, so that painted out that. So this was the frame, painted that out. And then these are all the same thing. We have little trackers that were added for each piece. So that was the palm, then the thumb. We had to bring back the edge of the thumb and the finger. And that's what all of this is. And then we transformed it, color corrected, blurred, transformed it a little bit further, color correction and blur. And then we merged that with, let's pull this back. So at this point, we merge with our render from Houdini. So here's this, change our light back to the right color space, color corrected, a little bit of depth blur in the back. And just like the previous shot, we took matte control, crunched it down, turned it into a bitmap. So we have an alpha straight, and then blurred it to get rid of all of the junk on the outside of our render. Blurred it a little bit to add in, and then merged it together with our hand. Then we had to add in John. So let's move over on our comp to where John is. So here we have John. Change the time speed for the drop. Added a key. And then put that on a card in 3D space, similar to what we did in the previous shot. So we have our, turn that off for a second. So you can see we have our 3D model, and we just placed John inside of it so that we know it's going to line up perfectly with our 3D track. Let me turn that matte back on. And we also know that it's going to cut them out to match our 3D tracking. Merge that all together, put that onto our geometry animation. So once we do that, you can see, here we go. And then we brought in our Olympic camera, which is just a static camera, and then rendered it out. So now we have John in the right spot and matted to fit inside the head. Blurred it a little bit and then merged them together. So now we have all of the pieces ready to be put on except for the light box. We added some film grain to that, and then we brought in our original footage, did the paint work to clear out the area where our 3D stuff is going to go, merge that on top, and now we have the basics of all our comp. So now we just need to deal with this box. Now the box is only for the beginning, because as it goes through, we're going to go to the original where John is actually holding it, and we're going to slowly transfer from the 3D to the original plate. And let me just show you how we did that. So I'm going to go back over on this side of the comp, which is over here. Just like we did in the last one, we did this cube map, put it on a shape. So we have a 3D box, merged in the scene with some lights to light it, and rendered it. So now we have this box in 3D space, and we're rendering it still. Don't have any animation on it because I didn't do an object track for this. Really couldn't anyway, because it was we're going from the real world to the mini world, so we're combining these two images. So we have this. One of the things that we had to deal with, though, is right here in the original clip, as he's dropping the box, there's a little bit of a twist. Now, since we have this 3D object, we don't have it moving in 3D space, but inside the shape, you can see these two keyframes here. What I did is I went over to the transform, and I just did the rotation. So it's not going to move in X, Y, Z, but it's going to rotate. And if we look at this closely, you can see I have it. This is where it started, where it came down. So if we come back, you can see that the hand, if we even go back further, the shape of the box is pretty much that angle. So I kept it like that all the way to here until it's going to transfer. When it transfers to John, he's holding it straight up. So I just used these keyframes, and you can see I twisted it just two so that it lines up with John's footage. So if we take a look at John's footage, you can see John's final render. Okay, so right now it's still 3D. And you can start to see the shape of the original box come through. And by a certain frame, now this is his original. So how we did that, let's go back over. Sorry, this is kind of confusing to jump around, but okay. So now we have our render. We'll go back to the 3D. Let's go back to here. So we have our twist. And now all we need to do is add the animation. So we have all this is color correction. So we color correct it, blur it a little bit. Then we have this tracker. This tracker was connected to the hand to get the animation. Add a little bit of film grain, and then I did this transform, which was just to kind of line up the box by hand for these last few frames before we transfer completely over to John's original plate. We have these instance transforms, and I'll show you what those are in this. Let me just show you what those are. So that is coming from up here. So the reason I have these instance transforms is because I wanted all these pieces to move together if I needed to do any kind of adjustment. So this transform right here, which is the hand, is going to move the box. And this roto shape that is for the finger. So if I take a look at this, you can see I have this. The tip of his finger here needed to go over the edge of the box just to make it look like he's actually holding it. And it came out pretty good. And then we add them all together. And there we go. And then you can see here in this merge, you can see I have a blend. We don't need this extra that's an extra keyframe, but it starts at 1 here. So this is our 3D box. And then it slowly over whatever many frames, 6 frames, it will transfer over to the original shot. And that's basically how we did it. So is this the only way that could have been done? Absolutely not. This is just one way that we ended up doing it. I can think of a lot of different ways that you could have done these composites. But again, just want to show you one way of doing it. It's just an overview. If you have questions, feel free to reach out and I'll try to answer any questions you have. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again in the next one.